Hi everyone, I'm Janeisha Johns and welcome to another exciting season of Discovery. Now last season we rediscovered St. Croix and learned about its hidden treasures and untold stories. And while I'm sure there's still plenty more to see and rediscover, we decided to fly north across the waters to our sister islands of St. Thomas and St. John. We'll begin the second season of Rediscovery on the smaller of the two islands, St. John. Now right off the bat, the natural beauty of the island jumps out at you and takes your breath away. But St. John is much more than just beaches and scenic sights. There's plenty of history, culture, and wildlife to learn about. So get ready to rediscover St. John.
Currently, about 63% of the island is under the stewardship of the National Park Service. The park was created here in 1956 to preserve unique cultural and scenic historical aspects of St. John. The park contains officially 20 different trails, and it turns out to be about 20 miles total. So some are shorter than others. The shortest trail that we have is about 0.2 of a mile, but the longest trail that we have is about 2.5, and these are one-way mileages.
Today, we will explore one of these trails and learn about the history of the area known as Cinnamon Bay.
Cinnamon Bay is one of the largest beaches on the North Shore. It's a site of the campground for the park. It had historically been a sugar plantation back in the early 1700s when they had started on St. John, but the campground's been there since the 1960s. The park itself on St. John gets roughly 1 million people a year. It goes up and down a little bit over the years. We've had as many as 1.2. We've had, in recent years, 800,000 or so.
And many of those visitors come to Cinnamon Bay where they meet Interpretive Ranger Don Neer. Today, Ranger Neer will be our tour guide, taking me and a few others around this historic site. Hi.
Hello.
I'm Janeisha.
I'm Don.
Great. Nice to meet you.
Glad to meet you.
What are we doing today?
Today we're doing a little walk of this area right here at Cinnamon Bay,
Okay.
talking about the various people that have lived here over thousands of years and their cultures and history, and we'll discuss some of the plant life as well and anything else that people would like to know about this part of St. John.
All right, well, let's get going.
All right. Welcome to the Cinnamon Bay Walk. My name is Don Neer, and today we're going to look at some of the history of this site over many thousands of years. We'll talk about the plants and the animals as well as we walk around for the next 45 minutes. But first of all, as we sit here looking out over the waves crashing on Cinnamon Bay Beach, we can imagine that we can see the ships of Christopher Columbus sailing by in 1493 on his second voyage, as we think that he did go right down through this channel, later named after English explorer Sir Francis Drake. Columbus, however, did not stop anywhere on St. John, nor at this beach, but if he had, he might have noticed that there were the remnants of huts here on this beach, looking fairly similar to this. Round huts with conical roofs made out of the native palm trees. So this was a thriving village of people known as Tainos. And they were here perhaps for a couple hundred years as part of a later group of people that lived on St. John for thousands of years, beginning as early as 700 BC. So had Columbus landed here, he would not have met these people because, in fact, we now know from archaeological evidence that they had left just prior to his sailing by in 1493, probably chased off by a more hostile group in the region called the Caribs, who lived further down the island chain in what is today Dominica, St. Vincent, Guadeloupe, in those areas. They would have come around the point there. The peaceful farming, fishing Taino people saw the war canoes, different than their own. They dropped everything more than likely and hightailed it over to Puerto Rico or Hispaniola, the stronghold of their culture at that time. This was a ceremonial court for the chief that lived in this village. Now all of the villages had a chief, so this was a very prominent village. And once a year at least they had all the subjects from this village bring before the chief, who sat at one end of this rectangular courtyard, objects of sacrifice, or perhaps a better word is just offerings to the many gods. There might have been bowls of food, statues called zemis, or different objects which, laid upon the ground, were then smashed by the chief, unfortunately for those that would follow, the archaeologists and those of us that would like to see things intact. But as an offering to all their various gods, then the layer of offerings were covered up with dirt, and over 500 years this was repeated here over and over and over. And remarkably, when they went in to investigate this, they found over 500 layers of perfectly preserved ceremonial offerings.
Now that's interesting. Armed with an overview of the bay's history, we follow our engineer to this section of the beach where we find this object. I know you're probably thinking it's just a rock, but actually it's much more. Hey, that's what I get for wearing sneakers at the beach.
So, you remember in the movie The Planet of the Apes when Charlton Heston was going down the beach and there's the top of the Statue of Liberty? This is what this kind of reminds me of. This is actually, as we can see, a big trough laying on its side with steps going down, and then it's sloped on the other side. So what would be the purpose of a trough laying on its side on the beach? Well, it used to be a cattle dip, as we can see from the picture of what this used to be like when it was actually part of the beach. The erosion has gone quite far back now, but this was actually on solid land at one point. And what they would do with the cows that grazed all around these hillsides back in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, would be to lead or pull the cattle through various chemicals inside that trough to get rid of their ticks and fleas before they would hoist them out by a rope to a waiting sailboat. And then, in much the same way in which they took them off the boat in St. Thomas, they would hoist them up, put them on the boat, and take them to St. Thomas or Puerto Rico, where they were turned into steak or hamburger. So this was part of that cattle ranching history here at Cinnamon Bay, and it's really hard to believe that virtually all the trees that we can see here now were gone during much of the 1900s, and they've grown back very quickly.
What we have here is a plant that's quite common throughout the Virgin Islands. It's the Morinda citrifolia, more commonly known as noni. The noni fruit it produces is used in traditional medicines by many different cultures. However, during the time of the Tainos, the fruit may have been a last resort meal.
Growing commonly in sandy, open, sunny areas on beaches or wherever you have lots of sunlight and good drainage are trees known as starvation fruit. The fruit, which starts out growing on the tree looking like a blanched potato, gets even wider and more soft over time. And if you were to pick it up and smell it very carefully, you would see why they call it starvation fruit. Smells like rotten cheese or
smells terrible.
vomit or something. And when they're squashed and laying around, the birds will eat it, the donkeys will eat it, you could eat it. but it wouldn't be very nutritious and it wouldn't be very enjoyable. So you'd only eat it if you were starving. Actually, the fruit is supposedly quite good for you. It's known as noni or nani, I don't know how you pronounce it, N-O-N-I. If you watch late night infomercials or go to health food stores, you'll see it bottled up in its juice form. They take the ripe, smelly starvation fruit or noni fruits and make a nice juice out of it. And you drink it and it cures everything from hangnails to cancer. Supposedly it's a very medicinal, herbal, supplemental thing that is the #1 crop in French Polynesia. It's also a big crop now in Hawaii, in different places, and not so much here on St. John, although the leaf, as we can see, which is nice and broad and green, is used as a local painkiller. So if you were to fall down on the trip today and bruise your ankle or scrape your arm or something, you'd take one of those leaves, wilt it over a candle or some other heat source, wrap it around that portion of you that hurts, and supposedly it takes the pain away. An old, long-standing bush remedy here on the island, hence the name starvation fruit.
When you're hungry and you're starving, do you ever eat that? I'm just kidding.
No. No, it's one of those horrible smells that you just stay away from.
Here's another common species with a unique talent.
Speaking of medicinal practices here in the Virgin Islands, you know, they didn't have drugstores back in the 17 or 1800s, and even if they would have, they wouldn't have had much in the way of what we consider to be modern medicines. But there is a variety of illnesses or ailments that are somewhat alleviated, and some of them do work by the leaves and bushes and even animals that you would find in the park. One of the more common ones, animals that is a non-slimy, hard-bodied millipede, locally called the gangalo. And it came from Africa either as a stowaway or possibly on purpose because it does have a few medicinal properties. Now, if you jostle...
It starts to smell, doesn't it?
Well...
Oh, you see? It
no, that's a poop.
defecates when it's
Yeah. But
scared.
by barely touching these at night when you're walking around your house, or in the daytime with a little gentle jostling and coercion, a fluid, see, I'm not really hurting this, I'm just getting it to respond. A fluid comes out of the body that looks and smells like maybe...
No, wait. Oh, okay. That's like
vanilla.
that,
Well, oh really? Well,
like
no.
a rub, like
Like iodine, actually, is what that's the key word we're looking for. And it's going to stay in my palm in much the same way. Now, I'm careful not to get that on my arm or someplace because it is quite caustic, this fluid, you know, in our homes here, which are sometimes quite open, and we have birds flying through and lizards crawling around on your lampshades and legs and everything. We have gongolos crawling around at night. They can get into your bed. You're sleeping, you don't know it. You wake up with a dead gongolo in your sheets as you've rolled over on one in the middle of the night. And now you have a nice big brown stain
scar, kind of like
on the side of your skin,
Okay.
which, if it's been there all night long, will leave a long-lasting scar. So you have to be careful of the fluid and not get it on the more tender parts of your
It
hand.
burns a little, doesn't it?
A little bit on the more, you know, tender areas. Now this is going to leave a nice brown stain on my palm unless I wash it off. But in 3 or 4 days it'll be gone. The same fluid, however, put on a toothache or a gum ache takes the pain away. That's the old remedy. So in lieu of modern day things you can buy in the drugstore, this is what you used. And I guess you probably really have to have a pretty bad toothache to try that, but that's what they used it for. And the other thing is, local lore at least says that by looking at the gongolo, notice I'm closing my eyes, eyeball to eyeball, there's a fluid that is squirted from its eyes into yours. I don't know if it's the same fluid or a different fluid as what's on my hand. But when it goes into your eyes, it temporarily makes you go blind, just for 3 or 4 days, but it could put a damper on your vacation or your life. So be careful of the gongolo, but other than that, it's quite nice.
So remember, don't look at a millipede directly in its eye. Oh yeah, if you have a toothache, go to the dentist.
Another aspect of the both the colonial era, when they had large beasts of burden to do all the work on the hills here, it's a trough, not a dipping trough, but a watering trough from the well, which is now capped. The water coming from these coastal areas is usually a mixture of salt water and fresh water, so not a good idea to use it for drinking for humans. Probably it never was. There are springs, though, across the road where they would have gotten their supply of fresh water, or as most of us do today, they collected it off the roofs into cisterns, either above ground or underground storage units to collect the water.
We've learned so much in a short amount of time. In fact, we've only walked a few meters around the Cinnamon Bay campsite. We are now heading outside the campgrounds to learn about the ruins of what was once a sugar factory and great house. But first, a quick stop on the way to learn about this tree, which was once very important.
This is a native tree that is quite noteworthy in that it is one of the hardest woods known to man. It is called the lignum vitae, meaning the tree of life, because it has lots of medicinal properties, but it has an extremely hard, dense, self-polishing wood. If you were to cut this, which would be very hard to do, any exposed wood you could rub and it would bring out the natural oils from within the plant. And so for that reason, and because it's very, very hard, sinks in water. Years ago, they used to use it for ball bearings in ships, steamships. And not too long ago, I mean back, 100 years ago, they were still using lignum vitae. If you go to federal court, supposedly, the judge will bang with the gavel. And both of those pieces are made out of lignum vitae.
Wow. Okay.
So it's a beautiful wood. If you go to some of the ruins here, old houses or factory sites all over these islands, and you'll look and see the walls are crumbling, but in the windows, where the window jambs and the door jambs were, quite often, there's still very good quality lignum vitae. It's a little bit rotten by now, 300 years later, but still, for all. Termites have virtually left it alone. So, the termites don't eat it, the bugs don't eat it, it doesn't rot. It's a very good wood. And you wouldn't really build too much out of it because nowadays you can't find too much of it. It's one thing that the Spanish did come back to the Virgin Islands for when they were living in Puerto Rico and other bigger islands. They never had anybody live here, and eventually it paved the way for the Danes or the English to come in and take over. But they did come back for things that were very valuable, including lignum vitae, which usually grows in a very fairly dry area on St. John, such as the Ram's Head Peninsula, out on the southern tip of St. John, where there's cactus growing. This is where lignum vitae likes to grow as well.
How large can this grow to be?
They can get pretty big. The biggest one I can think of on St. John is right next to the post office in Cruz Bay. They're quite typically multi-trunked. There's never just one straight trunk that comes up, and the one in Cruz Bay is no exception. There's quite a few in Cruz Bay, actually. They have these 3 or 4 or 5 trunks all coming out, and that one is quite large.
And here it is. This tree is said to be several hundred years old. Here's a quick fact. Lignum vitae are slow-growing trees, growing only a few feet each year. We've now left the campgrounds and we're walking to the ruins of the sugar factory. This factory produced sugar up until the late 1800s.
Now we're standing at the entrance of, or the beginning of the sugar manufacturing factory here at Cinnamon Bay, and this was one of the first ones started. Again, when they got the land in 1717, it took about maybe 8-9 years before they got all the buildings in place. the trees cut down. Imagine cutting down trees that were as big as those rain trees with a handsaw and then getting rid of the roots. And then for sugar growing, there was one more big important step, and that was to create level land on these hillsides, and you do that by terracing. So you had to make stone walls every 10 or 12 feet, backfill against that, and go up the sides of these mountains in huge concentric circles. Picture St. John with virtually no trees, but with giant stone walls everywhere, with 10, 12-foot sugarcane growing on those level areas. A totally different site as what we would see today. But the walls themselves were another huge undertaking that took a long time to make, again, by the enslaved Africans.
Now this area where you see these freestanding columns is where factory workers dried the sugar cane stock.
All of the sugar factories had one of these roofed, columned structures used for drying of sugarcane stalks. Once they were crushed, you know, the sugarcane is fairly a hard material. Once they ground it up in the top of the horse mill, there's a structure you can see right there, a round, big, huge, round, flat area where the rollers that were about 3 feet in diameter and maybe 4 feet long were spinning close together, kind of like on an old wringer washer. You then feed the sugarcane stalks through these revolving rollers. It gets caught in there, gets crushed. The juice runs by gravity, as we'll see in a moment, in the factory. And then the dried sugarcane stalks, dried here, were used for the fires underneath the pots that the juice was then ladled into in the reduction process of turning that sugar juice into a thick brown sugar called muscovado. So you take sugar juice, you reduce it, you get sugar. And this was a very efficient way in which to fuel the furnaces that we'll see as we walk through the sugar factory.
I noticed that it looks like there's a lot of coral used to make these columns.
Yes. Native stone from all over the island. You know, there's rock everywhere. Also, not so much in these columns, but as we'll see in the building, there's both red and yellow brick brought over as ballast in the boats from Denmark. And then coral that was taken live right out of the ocean, big, huge, giant, maybe hundreds of years old coral heads were extracted and then shaped into nice flat surfaces. An excellent building material that's hard as concrete. You can see a lot of it. And you can imagine that if you counted every piece of coral that we found in this building here and the various other walls, and then multiply that times roughly, say about 60, which is the number of known sites that we know about on St. John that were used for sugarcane and where these coral blocks would have been used. That's an awful lot of coral that was extracted from the living coral reefs back in the 17 and 1800s. If not for its use as a building material in all of these buildings in the 17 and 1800s, we probably would have a lot more coral all around St. John today and throughout the Caribbean. We're in the boiling room of the sugar factory here at Cinnamon Bay. There is the missing bench, as they called it, on this side of the room where the cauldrons were embedded, where the sugar juice was ladled one to the other and getting thicker to a desired consistency at the very end of the line, whereupon it would be taken off the heat and put on shallow trays over in this part of the room where it would crystallize, and later on it was dripped. Barrels full of brown sugar that still had a fair amount of molasses in it would be put on top of a wooden grate above what we can see as a depression point in the bottom of, or underneath a floor, where as a hole was poked in the bottom of the barrels, the excess juice would drip down and be collected for later use as rum or other products. There's various storage buildings basically elsewhere here, but there is a rum still and a cistern that you can see if you look that way with the chimney that's behind the palm tree, and that was utilized for the making of rum and also bay rum from the bay rum trees.
If you're wondering what's the difference between the two, here's a quick explanation.
The bay rum tree is a native tree that grows in the wild here in wetter spots like Cinnamon Bay or up in higher elevations. And the leaves were picked in the late 1800s up until about 1940 here on St. John. The oil was distilled out of the leaves. It's a very fragrant oil that when mixed with rum or other alcoholic products formed bay rum. Not what you drank, but what you applied to your skin as a cologne or toilet water or other uses.
And behind the factories are the ruins of an estate house. There were few great houses on St. John because incomes at that time were marginal at best. Many estates employed overseers who lived in modest structures like this one. Believe it or not, this house was last occupied in 1968. The Cinnamon Bay Trail may have been short, but the experience is one that will last a lifetime. Thanks to Don Neer and the National Park Service for their time and for making this experience a memorable one. And thank you for watching. So until next time, make sure to cherish your home, this beautiful island, but most of all, cherish each other. Rediscover St. John is underwritten in part by Keneal Bay, a Rosewood resort.